every CEO and founder is laser focused on building a product, improving the product, achieving product market fit. But there's like 20 or 50 other things that a founder wants to be focusing on, but just doesn't have the time and bandwidth for. And that's where the chief of staff plugs in. Ultimately, like you want to move as fast as possible at a startup. And that only happens if you hire the right people. And someone can bring on tons and tons of experience, but if they can't get shit done, it doesn't really matter. And vice versa, loyalty goes a long way. So people make mistakes. It's normal. Everyone makes mistakes. But if you can support your employees or back them up, I think that goes a long way in building trust. You can start monetizing from day one. You have to have no knowledge about how to sell ads or how to run an ad. We'll do all of that for you. So literally with your very first send on Beehive, you can start monetizing. And then from there, as your audience grows, as you learn more about ad placements and how to monetize, your user base is growing. You're also running more ads. You're just making more and more money.
We had a great conversation with Preeya Goenka, the COO at Beehive today. For those that don't know, Beehive is an email platform for creators and newsletter brands, and they have been all over the place on Twitter within the last couple of years. I believe they're one of the fastest growing companies in tech right now. And she actually started there as the chief of staff when they were pretty early on, and then later became the COO after they raised their Series A. So a lot of great stuff to learn from her, a lot of great stuff just in her experience getting into tech in the first place. She was in finance before, ended up jumping into this like private equity backed like tech roll up, and then has been at a couple like different startups before going early stage with Beehive. So lots of good stuff to learn about her experience scaling there, working with founders, acqui-hiring companies, and just tons of good nuggets from everything she's learned at Beehive. She's definitely a killer, and excited for folks to listen to this one. Preeya, welcome to the pod. I've been looking forward to this so for actually like context, I used Beehive for the first time like maybe a year ago. I had never heard of you guys. And my friend and I started this newsletter because we had both recently quit our jobs to start companies, and we were like in the middle of figuring it out. And we started this like personal finance newsletter for the hell of it. It actually just sold too. So I don't know exactly when that's going to be announced, but thank you. It was a side hustle, but it was very fun. And I was very impressed with the product, which is also just like blown up a ton. I feel like in the last year and a half, you guys have completely overtaken like Twitter tech. So it's been really impressive, everything that you've built. And so I'm excited to have you on too, because you're also just telling us that you've never been on a podcast before. So excited to be the first of many, I have no doubt. But getting into it, actually, I think your background's actually very interesting because I'm like literally stalking you on LinkedIn right now, and you were in finance early on, which is interesting. You had an internship at Barclays doing as like summer analyst trading, and then you went to BlackRock, which is interesting. You're an analyst there, and then you went to Lexington Partners doing investor relations. And then you jumped to, I actually tried to figure out as much as I could this morning about CM Group because I know they rebranded. But essentially, from what I understand, this was like a private equity roll-up of a bunch of different like enterprise software companies for marketing. And so you were there early as a customer success manager, and you got promoted like a ton of times. I'm not great at math, but it looks like 5 or 6 times. And so that's interesting. We'll hopefully talk about that a little bit. And then you were at a startup called Nugata that I know less about. You had a couple different roles there, VP of customer success, and then you were like the general manager of Americas. And then you joined Beehive as chief of staff, which I believe when you joined, it was still really fairly early, actually. So I think if you had told someone you had joined Beehive as chief of staff now and they were at all in tech and startups, that would probably look really impressive. But you joined fairly early when it was less obvious. And now you're the COO. And obviously Beehive, for those that are not familiar with it, is crushing it. You guys are essentially, you will intro this better than I will, but it's basically like email for creators, but much more focused on getting people build like an actual media business around that versus just like independent journalist writers, the way Substack does it. And increasingly, it feels like you're kind of also like a substitute for MailChimp if you wanted to be. But I'll let you frame that however you want to. But anyway, I think your background's super interesting. But my initial question is just like, how'd you get promoted like 5 or 6 times in a pretty short period of time in your time at CM Group? I think that's just like super interesting. And it seems like that was a fairly formative moment in your career. So I'd love to know more about like how you ended up there and then how you just like were just boom, 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 boom in your time at that company.
Yeah, I should have you do all my intros. You made me sound great. That's awesome. I started at Sailthrough as a CSM, like you said, in 2016. And I was there for 2 years before we were acquired by Campaign Monitor CM Group, which is now called Marigold. And so you were right. CM Group is a portfolio of a few different email platforms. And so after Sailthrough was acquired, I was able to work on other of the email platforms across the CM Group portfolio. So just worked really hard. I loved customer success. I loved working with customers, loved project management, loved problem solving. I think I had a really good knack with angry customers and big escalations. And so that got me from the CSM role up to a VP of customer success across the different brands. So I work with mostly Campaign Monitor, Emma, and Sail Through, and got a really good sense of the email world through all of that.
I just am now picking up on the fact that that was in the email space and Beehive is in the email space. And so I don't know if that was partially why you were like bullish on Beehive early, but I totally missed that.
Yeah, it's actually how I met Tyler. So when Tyler was at Morning Brew, Tyler Goenka, our CEO, Morning Brew was using Sail Through and Campaign Monitor for their email program. And I was actually Tyler's CSM. So we met early on, probably 6-7 years ago. He was my angry customer and my escalation all the time. And so we met there. We kept in touch over the years. I went to Nugata after I left CM Group, and I was overseeing sales, marketing, and customer success there. And Tyler went on to start Beehive. And he reached out to me probably 6-8 months after launching Beehive just to kind of pick my brain around customer success, go to market operations, all of that. And the more he was describing his challenges and what he was looking to build, the more it felt like a perfect fit for my skill set and what I wanted to do. So then I ended up jumping over to join Beehive as employee number 7 and their chief of staff.
Huge. And so that was like end of 2022. So were you guys had you launched yet? Or was it still fairly early in you being like public and out there in the market?
Yeah, we had launched. The company had a good number of customers at the time. So yeah, I joined just under 2 years ago. But we had a good product market fit, a good customer base, but it was still very, very early days.
Yeah. So you made it's a little bit of a bet though. So it was like pre the Series A, stuff like that. So a bit of a bet that you thought directionally that this seemed right though. Like, I guess it was any of your experience like pre-Beehive, did you feel like this thing needed to exist in the world? Or was it more of like the bet on like, hey, like Tyler and team, I like them, I know them. I think this feels like a good place to join.
Yeah, I would say more of the latter. It's actually funny. When I left CM Group, I'd been working in email for 6-7 years at that point, and I was very, very much done with email. I was like, I've been here for too long. I know the email space too well. I'm looking for something a little bit new and different, which is why I ended up joining Nugata, which is an AI tech company. I just wanted something a little bit different. And one of the first few times that Tyler and I chatted after he had launched Beehive, he was kind of walking me through Beehive and why he launched it and all of that. And I remember asking him why he decided to launch Beehive. And I said to him, I was like, the email marketing space or the email space is so incredibly crowded. It feels like the worst place for you to launch a startup. And he walked me through his pitch on the need for a tool like Beehive and like his vision for the company in a year, 2 years, 5 years, and all of that. And it was incredibly compelling because even though I'd worked in email for so many years, there was very much a need for a tool like Beehive. And a tool like Beehive did not exist, even though so many other similar platforms did. So the more he talked about it, the more he kind of walked me through his vision, I felt like it was a no-brainer for me to join.
That's crazy. I had in my head that like that somehow he probably found you and was just like, this person looks super talented. I'm going to recruit you away to my startup because I've definitely been that guy. But you guys actually had known each other for a while. Wow.
Yeah, I'd been solving his problems from day one when he was at Morning Brew. So I think like the stars kind of aligned there. And I had a long history and many years of experience working in email. So it seemed like a really good fit for what he was building. And at the time, Beehive was all engineers and product. Tyler didn't have like a right-hand person helping him out with like go-to-market operations, customers, all that sort of thing. So also that aligned very much with like what I had experienced in doing in the past.
So when you came on as chief of staff, you said employee number 7. I think traditionally, whenever people think of chief of staff roles, it's folks who are coming in a little bit later stage. I'm super curious, like whenever you were coming on, what exactly were you owning when it came to functions?
Yeah, a little bit of everything, I'd say. So how I kind of think about it is that every CEO and founder is laser focused on building a product, improving the product, achieving product market fit. But there's like 20 or 50 other things that a founder wants to be focusing on, but just doesn't have the time and bandwidth for. And that's where the chief of staff plugs in. And that's exactly what I was doing at Beehive. So it was a combination of like talking to our high value customers, keeping them happy, dealing with customer escalations, helping out with support tickets, proofreading internal emails, proofreading external comms to our customers, kind of a little bit of everything, even helping out on like the sales and cold outreach front. So it started off as like a role of many different things. And then over time, we hired people to take on parts of that role. And so my role kind of elevated and moved naturally into a COO role. But in the beginning, it was like really a hodgepodge of many different things.
Yeah, you just got to get shit done, right? And someone has to do it. So might as well be the chief of staff.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. You learn a lot very, very quickly. So it was a great experience.
So then going from the chief of staff role to COO role, right? I think that's a transition that I think a lot of chief of staffs would love to happen. Sometimes it does happen, sometimes it doesn't. Why do you think that worked out for you?
Yeah. So right from the beginning, there was a lot of things that I was owning. So I listed a few of them, but I was mostly involved with all of our customer things. So customer support, customer success. I was helping out with the sales front as well. So a little bit of like the cold outreach, sales outreach, also helping deals close, and then helping with a lot of like the other escalations around deliverability. So over time, as the company grew, as our revenue grew, as our product became more involved, we were able to hire people to take on those specific parts of the business, which meant that I was then still involved, but I was kind of overseeing the work instead of boots on the ground actually executing upon it. So we hired an AE who's doing the selling, but I was kind of behind the scenes helping them out. We hired a customer success manager who was the face-to-face with our customers, but I was again behind the scenes helping them. So again, like the progression from chief of staff to COO was very organic. I think in some cases it does happen that way, but I think in other cases, a chief of staff role is so different from a COO that the chiefs of staff that I've worked with in the past love being the person who's jumping around the business, putting out fires. Every single day looks really different. So they often don't want to move into a COO role, which is like a little bit more established. You have like more ownership of the work that you do. I think the roles tend to be really different. So one can lead into the other, but that's not always the case.
That makes sense. At least in my experience, when I was like a COO, it was a combination of like, okay, let me go jump into 1,000 different things, but also like, hey, you own these, let's say 3 or 4 back office functions. So totally relate. That makes sense to me. Something that always comes to mind whenever I'm talking to other COOs or even other founders is, what was the decision-making process, if you ever talked to Tyler about this, for whenever he decided to hire a chief of staff, or maybe he was even thinking of hiring a COO, like how do you kind of think through all?
Yeah, I think it's what I alluded to earlier, where Tyler, he's very much focused on like the product and engineering side of the business. Every day he has a list of all these things he wants to tackle, but just doesn't have someone that is able to help him with more of like the go-to-market and the operational things. And so you wanted someone who's kind of his like right-hand person to help out with all of that. Especially in the early days when, again, like the company was so engineering and product heavy, there wasn't someone that was owning basically everything else. So that's kind of where I came in. So in the beginning, it was like a lot of like ad hoc work. So I would kind of like complement what Tyler was already working on. And then over time, we both kind of gravitated towards our own strengths and what we enjoyed and wanted to work on. So Tyler loves the product stuff. He also loves growth and marketing. That's not naturally my skill set, but I love the sales side and customer facing things. So that's kind of what I started to own. So I feel like it was a good balance of like we both found our footing and like what we enjoyed and like where our strengths were. And then over time, just owned that function a little bit more.
So when it comes to owning functions, I found that like there's usually 2 type of profiles. One is kind of like the junior talent, get shit done type of person, right? Who just like wants to do 1,000 things at once, versus more of the senior operator who probably has owned some kind of functional department in the previous company. Whenever your team has thought about hiring operators, what kind of side do you lean on whenever you're trying to flesh out the team?
Yeah, I would say in early days, but even so now, we always err on the side of someone that has like the crazy hustle and the drive to just get shit done. I think like no matter how much experience you have or how much knowledge you have in a specific field or area, if you just can't get the work done like as quickly and as efficiently as possible, it's almost kind of meaningless to us. I don't think that's specific to Beehive. I think that's probably the case for any startup that's around the same age as we are. Because ultimately, like you want to move as fast as possible at a startup. And that only happens if you hire the right people. And someone can bring on tons and tons of experience, but if they can't get shit done, it doesn't really matter. And vice versa. We've hired tons of people that have very creative or unique backgrounds or backgrounds that don't align exactly with what we're hiring them for. But they end up being our best hires because they're so hungry, they're so eager to learn, and they're so eager to have an impact that they end up being like the strongest hires across the board.
Yeah, I think having that grit determination is the number one factor when it comes to hiring the best talent, whether they have a ton of experience or not, especially with the chief of staff role or any of these like more operator roles where it's just so vague and generalist in nature. You just got to be able to critical problem solve. You got to be able to not only figure out there's a problem, but then also own that problem end to end.
Yeah, and some people love that kind of environment and others can't function in it at all. Some people love walking into a role with like a completely blank slate and they have to kind of figure out what they need to do. They need to find the problems. They need to solve them themselves. I think there's a very specific type of personality that really thrives in that environment. It's very hard to find. And then conversely, some people need like a lot of direction and a lot of guidance. And there are times and places where that sort of hire is better. But I think when you're a younger company just looking to grow really fast, the former is always the right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like as you progress on your career, like you got internally promoted from chief of staff into COO, but also in just like previous companies, you were promoted, like Andrew said, like 5 or 6 times, right? So whenever you're thinking about preserving the team's trust in you, how do you preserve that trust going from like one level to the next level to eventually become an executive?
Yeah, I think a lot of people just overcomplicate it. I think it just comes down to good communication. So I have weekly or bi-weekly one-on-ones with all of my direct reports, all of my managers. And part of it's a good forum to actually like get a good status check or get a pulse on ongoing initiatives or figure out where we are and where we need to go. But part of it's also just to establish a relationship and build that trust and figure out how are they feeling, right? Are they getting the support they need? Are they happy in their role? How is their team functioning? How can I help them? It's just figuring out how they're feeling behind the scenes. So it's not just like a, hey, we're here to discuss the 10 items on this agenda, but it's a good chance for us just to catch up as human beings and figure out what's working and what's not working. I think also loyalty goes a long way. So people make mistakes. It's normal. Everyone makes mistakes. But if you can support your employees or back them up, I think that goes a long way in building trust as well.
And I mean, speaking of trust, right? If you're the second hand in the company, you got to have great trust with the CEO. Got to have a lot of great balance. I think just like from my time reflecting on it, I think I was in a similar position as you, where my CEO at First Base was very product oriented. He didn't necessarily want to own any of the back office related work, but at the end of the day, that's still super important when it comes to scaling a business. Whenever I was thinking about like how to create the right dynamic between the COO, CEO, looked at a ton of different folks, but I think Matt McInnes, the CEO over at Rippling, just had a great take. The take more was around like how great CEOs don't have to worry about their weaknesses. It's the job of the CEO to be the counterbalance, right? The direct quote was around like the CEO job, the most successful CEOs act with impunity in the work environment in a way that, number one, a good CEO doesn't really think about, and number two, a good second in command does think about that and then enable it actively to try to clear up the space for the CEO to go do their zone of genius, right? The small number of like very sharp spikes. Do you agree? Do you kind of disagree with that? Like, how do you think about creating the right dynamic between the COO and CEO?
I've ever thought about it that formally, but I think it does pretty well explain the relationship between myself and our CEO, Tyler. I think, again, there's things that we both gravitate towards, which correspond to our own personal strengths and what we enjoy. And thankfully, they tend to not overlap a ton. So what I am very strong in, what I have a background for is very much on the customer and sales side. Tyler loves product and marketing. So in a way, that's a really good fit for us to work together. I think also we've picked up over time what our strengths and weaknesses are in ourselves and each other. And so there's a long list of things I know Tyler doesn't like to do. And so like just kind of behind the scenes, I'll either empower him to get those done or I'll do the behind the scenes work for him to make his life a little bit easier. But I think he does the same for me as well. I think that quote is probably true, but I think it goes both ways, right? Like I think a COO also wants to work for a CEO that will like complement their own strengths and weaknesses. Like I really enjoy a lot of things about my role and I wanted to make sure that I'm working for the right CEO, especially as a chief of staff, right? The company is important, the product is important, but ultimately the most important thing you're looking for is, are you going to connect well and work well with your CEO? And that goes into like, do I trust this person? Does he have my back? Will they take care of me? Do we have skill sets that work well together? And I think that no matter how much everything else works out for you in a company or a role, ultimately the connection between the CEO and the chief of staff is the most important. And that's partially due to skill set, but partially also due to like the trust and relationship you've built together.
Real quick, I gotta ask, because you brought it up on this whole thing of being like doing the things that the founder doesn't like. And I had a tweet go a little bit viral like a week ago. I made a lot of people angry. That was not my intention, but I seem to be good at it. About like, I don't even remember exactly what I said, but basically that like too many young people want to be chiefs of staff at these like really, really early stage company. And this has mostly come because a lot of young people have asked me if like we're hiring and then like they're not technical. And so that would put them in the non-technical roles buckets where I need help. And usually they're like, I want to do like strategy or I want to be a chief of staff. And my kind of take is like there was no room for it pre-product market fit. But then you also did just mention that part of what you're really good at is taking on the things that Tyler is less good at or doesn't enjoy doing. And I can definitely empathize with the need for that at times. Like, do you have a take on, does it make sense to have a chief of staff before there's product market fit?
I think there is. I think you should hire a chief of staff as early as possible, as soon as possible. Again, like the CEO and founder is so focused on product market fit and so focused on the product. probably also fundraising, that there's all these things they want to be doing, all the things that they know are critical for their business, but they have literally no time to tackle. I think the chief of staff is like a perfect person to pick up all that kind of work. And so what that looks like from company to company is going to differ pretty significantly, but there's no reason that you need to wait until you hit a certain milestone to hire a chief of staff. And also the chief of staff's role and like what they own is going to change pretty dramatically week to week, month to month over time. I think that's fine. I think someone who is the right fit for the company, A, wants to be a part of that growth and transition, and B, will also be able to adapt to it. So I don't think there's any reason to wait until you have product market fit or wait until you've raised a certain amount of money to hire a chief of staff. Am I also going to get in trouble now on social media for saying
No. It's okay. You're allowed to tell me I'm wrong, and I'm willing to consider that I'm wrong. You, like, in a very nice way, just told me you're wrong. So I appreciate that.
Preeya, don't worry. You have a whole Beehive army on Twitter. I think they'll back you up.
A very big army. You are correct.
Mm-hmm. So I think something super interesting as well that you went through is you went through this internal promotion, right? Going from chief of staff to COO. But sometimes what happens is the CEO just directly externally hires a COO. So do you think there's like a professional dynamic difference between a COO who's internally promoted versus someone who's just hired outside the organization?
I don't think so. I think both can be equally impactful. I think the one benefit of hiring someone who's gone through the motions of chief of staff or to a COO is a chief of staff has done all the grunt work, right? They're the ones that have like executed all the work that needs to be done. They've been behind the scenes helping out. They've jumped from project to project. They have a very diverse skill set. So I think from there to move into a COO role, they're probably going to be really impactful because they've seen basically everything across every team, across the entire company. Versus if you have a COO coming in at that role, they might lack a little bit of that experience. But I don't think it necessarily means that one is better than the other. It's just a different way of hiring and promoting.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like there's also that whole interesting dynamic too, where a lot of times like almost like one of the founders is the COO, and that can be tricky. But I think the thing that resonated with me about what you just said about like there being a second, like a COO that already is kind of earned trust within a company. I like one thing that's nice about that is actually one of the people that suggested one of the questions we asked you today more or less kind of became quasi COO at a startup I was at previously after we fired a very reputable COO that had come in for like a week and it was like over. And yeah, it's like a really big throttle when you like bring in someone super senior, you tell the team, you're like, we're all really excited about this, especially a role like the COO. And they're just like gone like very quickly. Even if it's like in a few months, like 1 week is extreme. Like that's a huge throttling versus you coming in as the number 2 person in the company. Like people trust you already. People are already like, yeah, we've seen Preeya, like he's great. And he's kind of been there. And so in some ways it also like for outside looking at it, it seems like you would be much better positioned to succeed and just get shit done faster than someone coming in from the outside world would be.
Yeah, I think the big thing is that oftentimes when like a senior person is hired at a company, like I think VP or above, especially for like a C-level exec, is they come in with all these ideas of, hey, I've done this 5 times in the past. I know exactly what to come in with. I have a whole playbook. These are the 10 things I'm going to do. I want to cut costs. I want to improve efficiency, this, and this. And so they come in with all this mentality and all these ideas, but they haven't taken the time to understand the business. It's not always true, right? There are many, many good leaders that don't come in that way. But I think more often than not, people do come in with the idea of like, I already know what I want to do. This company is so young. They have so much to learn. I have so much that I can do right off the bat. And there's that like almost like ego complex versus if you've gone the route of the chief of staff to COO, you've done all the work. You've done all the heavy lifting behind the scenes, you know, the ins and outs of every part of the business as chief of staff. And so then when you go into a COO role, there's no way that that person is going to be making big changes without considering the implications of it, because they know the business so well.
Yeah. It's like you have all of the context you need. There's not this like abrupt change. With that context, you can keep making decisions, I guess, the way Tyler would or like one of the other founders would because of all that context.
Yeah, exactly. Like you just have a lot more knowledge about the company.
Yeah, totally. I want to switch gears a little bit. Actually, one of the reasons we also thought of having you on is acquisitions and M&A. You guys are like a pretty substantial size startup now, but it's not like you're, I don't know, like Google buying $28 billion companies either. So you buy a friend of mine's company that I worked with at a company called On Deck called SwapStack. And then you also recently announced the acquisition of the TypeDream folks, which I've used their product as well, actually. It's a pretty good product. So I'm just curious, like being at the stage that you're at and acquiring different companies, was this like an intentional strategy to go acquire some great teams and products out there that you think could fit within what you're doing at Beehive? Or was it more of just like you met these people people and you're like, oh, we've like got to work with them and they've got to be part of the team. And it's this organic thing where it just kind of happens.
Yeah, definitely not intentional. Very much the latter, I'd say. So for SwapStack specifically, so Tyler and I were running the ad network, just the two of us. Tyler had a really good sense of where he wanted the ad network to be in like a year or 2 years down the road. I was doing all the operations for the ad network. So all like the publisher communications, advertiser communications, handling the full campaign management. But we didn't have someone that was owning the ad network full time. And we wanted someone that had a ton of experience in the space because both Tyler and I had like maybe adjacent experience, but didn't have true experience when it came to newsletter advertising. So we wanted someone with all that experience, but also the product knowledge, but also the relationships and all of that. And so when we thought about it, we figured it made the most sense to hire someone that came from a similar product. And when you look at it that way, there's a very few list of companies out there that kind of fit the mold. Both Tyler and I had met Jake at SwapStack about a year before we acquired the company. And we thought what they were building was awesome. We really connected well with Jake and were really impressed by his work ethic and what he was building and all of that. And so over time, it just felt like it was a really good fit for us to bring him on board to run our ad network operations. He was basically building, again, what he had built at SwapStack, but within Beehiiv. And then similar thing with Typedream, Beehive's been focusing more on our website capabilities for the last 6 to 12 months or so. And it's, again, going to be a bigger focus for us in the future. And we've had a lot of companies reach out to us with various tools or products looking for us to work with them or to acquire them. And Typedream is one that really caught our eye because what they've built is incredible. They have such a powerful platform. And internally, our options were we can either take on the team that's built this product and have them build it again for us at Beehive, or we can take what will be probably 1, maybe 2 years and rebuild it ourselves. But we don't really have that context or that experience. We're kind of starting from scratch. We could go out there and hire someone that works somewhere else to do it for us. At that point, it just felt like bringing on the Typedream team made a lot more sense. So again, that acquisition just kind of happened because the opportunity presented itself and we were able to get the best talent to then own our whole website initiative.
Interesting. One of my follow-up questions to this was going to be like, when does it actually make sense to acquire a team versus just like recruiting people yourself, especially in this market? Like Beehive can probably do pretty well with hiring because like you're one of the handful of tech companies that's both hot and just generally growing really fast. But I guess when you frame it in the way of like these people not only have been like they've already been working on this problem as a cohesive team, you don't have to like reconstruct that team and that context from scratch. And it seems like that's the bet, that because you can acqui-hire this company, they've already got experience, the team already works to some extent, that is actually faster than like, how do we construct a team to go do this thing entirely from zero? We're going to be able to move faster if we just go like buy this company. Did you roughly agree with that characterization, or would you frame it differently?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think in both cases, we found a product that we were looking to largely replicate within Beehive. So instead of us calling together resources to make that happen or hiring someone else to then rebuild that same thing, why not just hire the person that's already built it the first time because they have the most context and the most experience? I think also the whole founder mentality goes a long way. Someone that's built their own product, someone that's been a founder and a CEO in the past is a really, really good fit for us to bring onto Beehive because we know they have insane work ethic. They work really hard. They're good at problem solving. They have like this perfect personality and skill set that we are always looking for. So that's also not something that's like to be minimized.
Yeah, I am a big fan of hiring founders. Like our first hire was a founder. And I think it's underrated because their resumes look odder or something like that than like just any other person's does. But oftentimes if you can get them or like find the way to line it up, they just bring so much. It's not even just the energy and ambition they bring, but it's also the fact that they just like don't get phased by the kind of stuff that some people do in a startup because they've already been through it a bit. I am curious though on onboarding people. Like I have no clue actually. We kind of went through it a little bit at a previous startup, but I wasn't that close to it. I've always wanted to ask Jake about this actually, but how hard is it to like integrate this other culture and this other team into your existing team and your existing culture when like they were just their own like independent band of pirates before they joined your independent band of pirates?
Yeah, I'd say we onboard and hire, or rather we onboard people that we've brought in through an acquisition the same way as any other employee that we've hired. So we have a pretty robust 90-day onboarding process. That's a combination of meeting people across the org, product onboarding, learning the operations and processes across Beehive. And so everyone goes through that regardless of how they've joined or been hired into Beehive. I think the culture part is it's a two-way connection when you do an acquisition, right? It's like both the examples that I mentioned, they were a really good fit for Beehive, but they were also a really good fit for the company we acquired, where they had built something incredible, but they knew to take it to the next level. They wanted to be a part of something a little bit bigger, and they could find their home for that next step within Beehive. So I think when you have two parties very eager to make that connection and commitment, the culture kind of flows together really well. And it's not like something that you have to force to make happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess on that point, one of these companies that you did buy is SwapStack, and you did mention that it was kind of to help jumpstart this ad network that you're building. Like, I'm enough of a student of tech history to know that it's really hard to build an ad network. I mean, there's like a ton of companies that have failed, and most of the startups that actually went after the space like over a decade ago, like just ended up getting eaten by some big tech company. So this is like a non-trivial thing to go do. It sounds like you were working on this network before you bought SwapStack. So how did it start at Beehive, and what was kind of like the motivation there? Essentially, what I'm trying to understand is, how do you even start with something so difficult? How do you take this from 0 to 1?
Boy, do I have a good story for you about that. So the ad network we actually launched almost 2 years ago. It was before we had any product built within the Beehive app. It was well before the acquisition of SwapStack. And so we knew what the end result of the ad network would look like, but we hadn't started building it yet in the product. And so how it worked is we hired an agency that would do our ad sales for us. And when a deal closed, they would pass the details to us around like what we owed the advertiser in terms of the number of clicks, their target audience, any other criteria of the campaign. And at the time, I was overseeing and running the ad network by myself. So I would use a combination of internal reporting to find the publications that would be the right fit for a specific campaign or advertiser. I would then export that list, and I would email each one of the publications individually and ask them if they wanted to run an ad placement. If they did, I then had a corresponding spreadsheet for every single campaign that we were running on Beehive. And in there, I would write down every single placement that was scheduled along with the date and the version of creative that they were going to be using. We would share creative over a Google Doc. So I'd make a copy of a Google Doc for every single publisher running every single ad, share the copy with them that way. They would then run the ad placement. I would go into their account a few days later, look up the email send, look up the placement, find the reporting, drop it into the same spreadsheet, and then on a weekly basis, share that reporting with our advertisers. So if you think about it, if we had 20 campaigns running, that was 20 spreadsheets with every single placement running there. It was 100% manual across everything that we were doing. And yes, it was incredibly painful, but it was the best way to learn, right? I talked to publishers all day, every day. I heard all their pain points. I heard all their feedback. I talked to advertisers all day, every day, heard the same thing from them. So eventually when they got around to start hiring for the ad network, we both had a very, very good sense, Tyler and I, of who we wanted to hire and what we were looking for. And that's kind of how the SwapStack acquisition came into play.
You're psychotic, because that just sounds like you'd have to be psychotic to do that. I can't even,
a little bit.
Like that many spreadsheets per company. How much lead time too do you even have? Because sometimes you guys are selling these things like only weeks maybe before the ad actually goes live.
Not even. I think we had like maybe somewhere between like half a week or a week of lead time there. So it was a lot of like last minute frenzy of making sure people had the right assets and the right materials, and the publishers had a million questions. So going back and forth over email, over all of that. I'm sure all the early customers of Beehive all remember me emailing them literally on a daily basis, begging them to run ads for us. That's how the ad network was born. Of course, we've come a long way, but yeah, that was the start of it.
Yeah. What was harder in that equation? Is it getting your existing writers and creators to want to like throw up an ad on there and like try this out? Like, I would think that that's pretty easy, but like, what's harder between that versus getting the actual buyers themselves to pay for an ad?
Yeah, I would say both are hard in just very different ways. I think on the advertiser side, brands are used to spending a ton of money on their marketing, but it's mostly dedicated towards social media. So even though it seems like everyone is doing newsletter advertising, it's still a pretty new channel for a lot of brands. So convincing them to take their budget away from social media or another channel and allocate it towards newsletter advertising is a pretty difficult conversation. Some brands get it and have done it before, but for a lot of brands, it's a very new thing for them. So they have to test the channel, they have to get comfortable with it, they have to learn about it, and then only are they allocating more and more spend to it. All that just takes a lot of time and education. On the publisher side, it's interesting because overwhelmingly publishers will tell us, yeah, we want to run ads, we want to monetize, just tell us what to do. But then there's a few different things that come up. One is a lot of publishers haven't run ads before, so they don't really know what to do. So even when given the opportunity, they'll sometimes say no because they just don't know how to react. And other times, I think publishers have a certain idea in their mind of what sorts of ads they want to run or what their payout should be. but because they haven't done it before, their idea is very different from what reality is. So again, it's a lot of education of us having to teach them like, hey, this is actually what the ad market looks like. And this is how you run ads. And this is how we'll pay you. So it's not like they're terrible blockers on either side, but it just takes a lot of time and patience to break down those barriers.
Yeah, like the word that's coming to mind for me is that I feel like historically these kinds of ads were bespoke. Like we actually ran a couple at a previous startup, and like we were talking and texting with the actual newsletter writer before we like put the ad on there. And so it was not like buying a Facebook ad. It was like we were very targeted with who we worked with. We were very targeted about the creative. They were very opinionated about how it was going to look. But an ad network to me implies like Facebook. Like I'm going to just buy this ad, and it's almost like self-serve and programmatic to some extent. Where do you expect like a long run? Obviously, like how you get it started is different than where it ends up. But where do you think if you zoom out like 3, 4, 5, 10 years, is it somewhere between like the very bespoke and the extremely automated, or is it like do you maintain some kind of bespokeness while still being a network, or is it like much more akin to buying something like a Facebook ad?
Yeah, I think it's probably somewhere in the middle. So right now it's still largely a manual process of how we run the ad network. We have all the ad tools built into the Beehive platform. So the entire workflow of asking publishers to run ads, them scheduling placements, and getting paid out, all the reporting, all of that is in the app. But a lot of the matching that we do between advertisers and publishers is still a bit of a manual process. So our next big goal is to have that fully automated. So we can look at all the historical performance for any specific newsletter and look at all the historical performance across all of our campaigns and quickly figure out exactly what newsletters should run what ads. That's all happening on like a very easy, quick, and automated basis. The next step from there is for us to be able to show different ads to different readers based upon what we know about them. So you opening up a newsletter, you'll get shown one ad versus me opening it up, I'll get a different ad. It's still native placements within the newsletters. So it's not any kind of programmatic or banner ads, but it's still dynamic based upon what we know about each individual users. Those are the two main things that we're working on right now. And then from there, just keeping on growing and growing, right? Like getting more sophisticated with what sorts of ads we show to certain people, collecting more data, being able to optimize every single step of the workflow. So it is a true ad network in the sense of any brand can come in and throw down whatever spend they want to, and we can allocate it in the most efficient way across dozens or hundreds of thousands of newsletters. But it is still hyper specific and customized based upon A, the newsletter, and B, also the reader.
Yeah, why guarantee them? I feel like that's pretty bold. Like maybe I read this like tweet wrong, but I saw, I think it was Tyler tweet about like guaranteeing that every person gets an ad placement. And to me, I'm like, so I could just start a newsletter and have my mom and dad subscribe, and like now I potentially make like a few pennies on an ad. Like it feels like a bold move. What's the thinking around that?
Yeah, what you outline is exactly what we're going for, right? We want anyone who has any kind of blocker in launching a newsletter or wanting to move over to Beehive to feel so comfortable and knowing that they can make money while on our platform that it doesn't stop them from moving over to us. So you can start monetizing from day one. You have to have no knowledge about how to sell ads or how to run an ad. We'll do all of that for you. So literally with your very first send on Beehive, you can start monetizing. And then from there, as your audience grows, as you learn more about ad placements and how to monetize, your user base is growing. You're also running more ads. You're just making more and more money. That's a huge opportunity for all of our publishers. So the one guaranteed ad a month, that's what we tell publishers. But in reality, we're sending them a lot more than just one ad per month. And our goal is, which I think we'll get to pretty soon actually, is for any newsletter who wants to monetize on Beehive, we'll have an ad placement for every single one of their sends that go out through Beehive. So if you're a publisher with a daily newsletter and you're sending 22 times a month, we'll have 22 ad placements for you so you can monetize every single send that goes out through Beehive.
Andrew, I don't know if you've seen or experienced like getting an ad before. It's an insane experience, at least from my point of view. Just being able to figure out like an easy way to get monetization for my newsletter. Right? And now hearing like under the hood of everything that goes on, to me, I think goes back to what you're saying. It's a little bit psychotic, a little bit like, okay, like how do you operationalize all of this going on? So just got to say congrats, Preeya. Like that's awesome that you're able to build out something.
Yeah, we're working on it. We're working hard.
Yeah, this is not at all on the agenda, but are you just like really good at context switching? Because you had like probably 7 or 8 other jobs when you were doing this ad network. How do you like manage the sheer of that? Like, because like if it's something I'm okay at, but I still struggle with is that when I have like 6 or 7 different things that all kind of like have to keep going, especially if they're really different, it's very hard sometimes to switch to the next thing and recalibrate my brain. Are you just like really, really good at that, better than the average person? Yeah, I'm very curious how you manage that.
I just say yes, I am, but I think it's just the nature of the game. Even when you're in customer success, you have such a big book of business of like a dozen or a few dozen different customers. Each customer is different. Each one has its own needs and wants and all of that. So you're kind of always thinking through like many different scenarios and problem solving across different escalations all the time. And so you have to be very good at context switching as a CSM. And I feel like that kind of just carried over the years of my career and then led me to my chief of staff role. But yeah, the ad network thing, it was definitely like this big beast. It still really is. But the ability to like stay very, very organized and be able to context switch was definitely very crucial to that.
Yeah. On that point, another thing I added the last minute when thinking about this morning is I'm curious, like, you strike me as like a very motivated person, like almost like a tryhard. And I say that with respect. I love tryhards. You strike me as that kind of person. Otherwise, I feel like you probably could be chilling at a somewhat more comfortable job, like especially after the run that you've had at previous companies. Yeah, it's almost like you keep going even earlier and earlier and earlier and like taking on like new challenges. Like what motivates you? Like what's the fuel behind like why you work so hard and have like taken all the risks that you have in your career?
It's a really good question, trying to figure it out myself. But I think a few things. One is I really enjoy like a lot of moving pieces, a lot of chaos. I think it's a lot of fun to come in when everything is kind of on fire and it's part of your job to figure out what's going wrong and to help put out those fires. I think also the context switching part is also like, I think I get bored really easily. So if I'm focusing full time on one thing, it just becomes a little monotonous versus if I can focus on a lot of different things at the same time, it just keeps things a lot more interesting. I also get very restless in my career. So we talked about how I was at CM Group for 6-7 years. And it was a lot of fun, of course, to like have different roles across the company and to move up and become promoted. But the flip side is that by the end of this 6-7 year run that I had that ended with me being the VP of CS is our company had grown so much through acquisition that we weren't really focusing a lot on organic growth or customer growth or even product innovation. So I felt very much like I wasn't really having an impact on the company. We weren't really doing a lot. And even though on the outside things look great, inside out, it felt very stagnant to me. And that's when I was like, okay, I think I have to go to a smaller company where I can have more of an impact, but also I'm not just working in customer success. I'm overseeing multiple different functions. So led me to Nugata, the Series A company. I was happy there, but I was like, wait, I want something even scrappier and even younger where I can do even more, which pushed me to Beehive. And it's a lot of fun, honestly, like to come in when you're the 7th employee and then see the company change and grow so much over time and be able to think about like the impact that you directly and personally have had on that. It's such a good feeling. And it's just such a fun thing to be a part of.
Yeah, I resonate with that. I feel like every great like operator, founder, or whatever that I've ever been around, they're a little bit restless. They would go crazy. It's like that stagnation thing. If you feel like you've stagnated, it's like this isn't right. Even if to everybody else, like so many people would almost wish they could stagnate in the spot you're in. It's just like, no, I hate this. I got to do something new. So yeah, that resonates a ton with me.
Yeah, I also felt that way. I also felt like once I had accomplished this goal of mine to get the VP title, it's like, all right, now I can kind of cruise in my career. I've built this great thing. Now I'm kind of here for the long run on cruise control. And that was my goal for basically the rest of my career. And I think I lasted like 6 months in it because at that point I just was ready for something new and ready for my next challenge.
Yeah. But my last question before we wrap, like actually, when you get to that level and it's like you got all these different companies that you're managing and you're like a VP, you've made it, like how different is it being at a private equity backed company like that versus like a venture backed company? Because most of the people we've had on the show so far, they've only done venture backed companies or maybe a big tech or something, but like no one's really done the private equity backed thing. It's just how different is that like operating in that environment versus like a more traditional like Series A, B, C venture backed startup?
It's very, very different. I think it's not so much related to like who's backing. Like I think in both cases, the companies had pretty free reign in terms of what they want to do and what they want to build. It hasn't been like the VC or the PE that's been backing us has limited what we wanted to do or could accomplish by any means. That can be the case sometimes. It wasn't for us or for me. I think it's more just like the pace of innovation and the hunger and the drive is just so much different. thinking back to my days at Campaign Monitor or at Sail Through, we would release one big feature, maybe a quarter, maybe once every other quarter. And that was like a really big deal for us. We'd have tons of marketing go out around it. We'd have lots of like social media hype, but it was like once or twice a year that we would do that maybe. Versus at Beehive, we have a product announcement, I think every single week. And each product announcement has like 4 or 5 features that we've released. So the pace of innovation is just like night and day. There's no comparison. I think also it just depends on like when and where you're entering the market. Like for Sail Through, it was a pretty established company in a pretty established field. So while we were releasing new products, there wasn't much that we needed to release to remain competitive because we were already one of the dominant players in the space. Versus Beehive is playing probably a decade or more of catch up behind everyone else in the industry. So, all our main competitors out there have been around for more than 10, 15 years. And so we have all those years of gap to close in terms of like just basic email feature releases. So we have to move fast to remain competitive, which is not always the case for other companies out there.
Totally. I feel like the velocity that you guys ship with is like, there's very few companies that operate with that. And it's not just on the product side. It's like, I think if there's anything I admire about Beehive, it's that you have found a way to make the entire internet root for you and believe in you in a way that's not easy to do. And so it's very impressive. And like all of the little details add up to making that possible. So huge fans, I have a ton of respect for you, everything you guys have built. Where should people go to follow along like with you, with Beehive itself? Like we'll put links in the show notes and stuff, but where should we send folks?
You can definitely follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter. We're very active on both platforms. If you're looking to sign up for Beehive, you can just go to our website and sign up for a free 30-day trial, no credit card required. If you want to email me directly, feel free to at Preeya@beehive.com.
Yeah. And then we'll also get your Twitter in there. Maybe one of these days you'll start tweeting a little bit more. There were a few good ones in there. But well, thank you for coming on. This was awesome. And that's the pod. Thank you for listening to the Operators Only podcast. We put a lot of work into this. So if you're on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever, hit like and subscribe, hit follow, leave a 5-star review. Makes me feel like it's not just my mom and my girlfriend that listen to this. And most importantly, please DM me any ideas that you have for how to make the show better, new guests that we should have on, new formats. I'm all ears to everything. We're trying to make this better. So if you have ideas, find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or whatever platform and hit me up. I want to hear how you think we can make this better. And with that, I'll see you next time.